to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show with Corey and Justin. Here they are, the Fourth and Long Fantasy Brothers.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. My name is Corey, and I am here with my actual brother, Justin.
Hello, this is Justin.
Episode 5, here we come. Justin, how are you?
Man, I'm doing much better than Deebo Samuel these days, huh? I mean, bad news. First real big injury news that I think we've heard so far this offseason. Deebo Samuel going down with an injury. Looks like he's going to be out for 3 to 4 months at this point with a broken left foot. That's never a good thing for a wide receiver. I know these Jones fractures, which is what they're reporting the injury was, can come back to haunt these skill players. Corey, what are your thoughts on the 49ers pass catchers now?
Well, I have to wait and I have to see. I'm not going to jump to any assumptions right now. There's not a name, obviously, that sticks out. There's rumors, although, who knows if you can trust them, rumors floating around that they might go and pursue another option out, whether it's via trade or something like that or a free agency move. So with that being the case, I'm not really banking on anybody just yet, but I imagine you have an opinion.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely makes the rookie Ayuk a little more interesting. He wasn't really somebody that I was necessarily going to be targeting in redraft settings. But I think now, given the news with Deebo being out for at least probably the first month or two of the season, and then you got to figure the rehab if that all goes smoothly as well. I mean, it definitely brings Ayuk into the conversation. And are we back on the Dante Pettis hype train yet?
Yeah, I'm trying to stay away from that hype train because I know that bit me last year. I bought in. I loved what I saw from his route running ability. Reminded me of Keenan Allen, the way that he would run routes. But I'm afraid of going in on him again because clearly, I don't use that word clearly lightly because it was just so obvious that he was put in the doghouse in San Francisco and really wasn't getting much of a shot, even getting on the field.
Yeah, I think to your point, it's a wait and see approach at this point, right? I mean, you got the guys on the depth chart you're monitoring, and at this point, you just hope that someone emerges as Garoppolo's favorite in preseason training camp, and then you can bite on him for at least the first couple months while Deebo recovers.
So what does this do to Deebo for you in your rankings currently?
Definitely drops him down because, I mean, if there's going to be question marks, going into the season, I'm definitely going to be moving him down. I was pretty high on him this year. I mean, he was definitely a player that I was going to be targeting in dynasty drafts. So I think it kind of clouds his outlook for the year. I'm not going to necessarily totally fade him, but it definitely drops him down a little bit.
So I guess we're both in a little bit of a wait and hold until we hear more, but it's definitely not going to be a positive thing for him without a doubt.
Wait and see.
All right, then let's get to it.
On today's show,
it's time for some early predictions on who we expect to be fantasy busts this year. Justin and I will be counting down from 5 to 1 our players who we think will cost you on draft day and will end up being your fantasy regrets for the season. Justin, some rules for us to follow just to clarify what we're talking about. Number 1, and this is the most important because this isn't necessarily going to be a high-profile list. This list is a group of not just busts, but complete busts. So a complete bust signifies the player will have little to no value come mid-season. So you will not hear me say Derrick Henry is a bust because he's my 15th ranked running back when consensus has him in the top 10. I believe Derrick Henry will have value just as an RB2. So he won't qualify as a complete bust in this list. Number 2, we'll base this off of the expert consensus ranks on Fantasy Pros. This way we're following the same system and we have sort of the same mindset of where these guys are going. Number 3, this player has to cost you something on draft day. So you can't pick out an undrafted player because they have no value currently. Therefore, they can't bust, right? So let's stick to the top 120-ish players. And we're going to start with the lower ranked guys and we're going to work our way up. How's that sound, Justin?
Yeah, man, I'm ready for this. It was definitely difficult coming up with this list because you're talking about guys that are not just going to be underperform against their ADP, but these are guys that you essentially probably won't be rostering come mid-season. So I'm ready to get into it.
Yeah, so this is a tough list to come up with, and these are bold takes, but these are guys who are currently going drafted, who are not going to be on rosters most likely or are going to be permanently benched towards the end of the season. And the guys that kind of stick out in your mind of who would be these individuals, the name that comes to my mind in terms of this is like somebody like Odell Beckham Jr., right? Who last year was someone who was drafted as a wide receiver 1, and by the end of the season, you weren't even confident starting him. So he would have been a bold call last year, but you could really call him a complete bust because it's not like he was returning wide receiver 2 value. He was really kind of just a risky wide receiver 3 last year.
David
Justin, do you have any?
David Johnson's a great example too. I think in this this list, he was a guy that was drafted, to be a top 5 running back last year, and he was unstartable after week 8. So I think he would fit the criteria for this list as well.
Perfect. There's one example of a high-profile running back, one example of a high-profile wide receiver. So let's go ahead and let's do this. Justin, I briefly looked over our lists and found no overlap, so we can touch on every guy individually. We'll go back and forth, start with your bust and then my bust, and then we'll give a quick reaction and then move right along. So let's start with your number 5 and work our way through the list. Justin, your number 5 complete bust for 2020.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with a running back to start off the list here. And I'm going to go with Jordan Howard, running back for the Miami Dolphins. I think we got to remember here that Howard is a jag, just a guy, as we like to call him. He's nothing really special, right? I mean, I feel like Matt Nagy and the Chicago Bears, they tried to make Jordan Howard a jack-of-all-trades running back, and it just never really worked out. We also have to remember a couple other things. One being the offensive line with Miami still remains subpar. They traded away Laramie Tunsil, who was, arguably, actually, without arguing, their best offensive lineman to the Texans last year. They just don't really have much talent on an offensive line. The other thing, too, is, and I know you touched on this last episode, Corey, or maybe it was the episode before that, Breida is in the picture now. And Matt Breida is a pretty talented running back when he's on the field. So I think we could see a situation where Jordan Howard is a kind of in a 50-50 timeshare with Matt Breida, but then come week 3, we could see Breida and potentially even a rookie or an unsigned free agent come into the fold and really take hold of this backfield. So I'm busting Jordan Howard this year.
Yeah, when Jordan Howard had this situation alone, he had a small amount of appeal to me, but I agree with you. He's just another guy. He really isn't anything special. And even still, what I was looking forward to when Jordan Howard had this job alone was looking at the 2nd and 3rd running back on the depth chart and picking those guys up because, if those guys even have a bit of that startable running back talent, they will blow Jordan Howard out of the water. Howard has not been able to find a consistent home. Even on the teams he's performed well with, you can just see these teams are very willing to move on from him. Howard competing with Breida now has no appeal to me, right? As long as Breida's healthy, I think he's the one to own. I think he's the one that's going to be successful. Is Howard going to give you a good game where he gets a couple touchdowns? You better believe it. But other than that, he is going to be a fantasy bust. So I'm with you.
Corey, who's your number 5 on your list?
Yeah, so I'm gonna start off kind of vanilla, kind of bland here. I'm not gonna consider this a bold take. It's kind of easy to pick at a tight end, but my first complete bust is going to be Austin Hooper. He's currently being drafted as tight end 11, tight end 10, kind of in that range where you're drafting him as your starting tight end on week 1. You're expecting him to return some type of value. But look, nothing has impressed me with Hooper last year. He reminded me of just another guy, right? Like Eric Ebron the year before him and Kyle Rudolph the year before that. He'll fall into a trap of being seen as a value, and he's going in that, he could be a tight end that I could scoop up, and really I'm going to love starting him week in and week out. But ultimately, I see him busting completely. Right? He's a prime candidate to be a fantasy jabroni this year. He will be a staple of your free agency after week 6 is my prediction.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that's a good call. I think Hooper definitely benefited from Dirk Cutter's offensive system in Atlanta last year where they hawked the ball up over 600 times. I think I talked about it on the last episode where Dirk Cutter's offenses have really been fantasy gold mines for players in over the last half decade or so. He moves over to Cleveland Browns. You've got Kevin Stefanski in as the head coach now. And Stefanski has historically had a very run-heavy offensive scheme, and he should have a pretty strong influence on the offense, especially in his first year as a head coach. I think a Kyle Rudolph-esque season is probably to be expected, which is definitely not top 10 material. I agree completely.
Okay, Justin, who is your number 4 complete bust?
So I'm going to stick with tight end here, and I'm going to go with Rob Gronkowski. You got to remember here, man, Rob Gronkowski has 2 other really, really serviceable and really talented tight ends on the roster he's going to have to compete with in O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate. Plus, you cannot forget that he's got 2 of the best wide receivers in football that are going to be commanding targets as well. I'm just not totally buying into Gronkowski being a relevant fantasy tight end this year. he hasn't played meaningful football in over a year at this point. I think the name recognition for Gronkowski alone will drive up his ADP to the point where he'll be probably a top 8 tight end by the time the season starts. Especially if we watch a preseason game and he jumps over some rookie corner or some rookie safety or linebacker, in preseason week 3 to score a touchdown, the hype's going to go off the rails here. So I think I'll be avoiding the tight end situation in general for Tampa.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily agree. I think last I saw, is it true, Justin, you can confirm for me, is Gronk going like around that tight end 7, tight end 8 rank right now?
Yeah, it's kind of up and down. He goes 8, 9. Then I see him sometimes on some sites at like 10 or 11. So he's right around the back end tight end 1 landscape.
Okay, so it's a similar take to what I had with Hooper, but I don't necessarily agree. I think that Gronk may have value, but I understand the logic. Gronk would be someone that I would like to grab in like the 13th round, but the fact is that I doubt I'm ever going to see him there, right? So at that point, I might as well just agree with you there and say, yeah, I think he's going to be a kind of that bye week sort of streaming tight end guy that you might be interested in. But if he's going to go as the tight end 7, that's, tight end 8, that might be a little bit too high. Again, someone who I'd like in like the 13th round, but I doubt I'll see him there.
I think what we'll probably see with Gronk this year is you'll probably see a couple games where he goes absolutely bonkers and puts up, 75 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns. And then he has games where he completely disappears. So, I mean, in my mind, that makes him a complete bust. He's going to be a guy that you're going to be very frustrated starting, I think, all year this year if you do in fact get him.
Fair enough.
All right, so Corey, who's your number 4?
Yeah, so my number 4 bust, I'm going running back here, and I'm going to go with Cam Akers.
No.
I know this hurts you, Justin. I know, because you like the talent. And look, I don't hate the talent either. I kind of like what I saw in the limited amount of film that I watched on Cam Akers. But look, it's a crowded backfield. Malcolm Brown remains the forgotten man in that backfield. Sean McVay likes him, seems to use him a lot in situations where, especially at the goal line and things like that, right? It seems like it might be a nice fit down the line with Cam Akers, but for now, I see it being Henderson and Brown who will get the first shot. And the big point here is I'm not even necessarily convinced it's a running back job worth having, right? If you're like me and you really think Gurley still has it, and he wasn't able to get the waters moving last year, I'm worried. I'm just overall very worried.
I think they were, the Rams were essentially forced to use Malcolm Brown last year in the situations they did just because Henderson was so incredibly terrible at pass protection. They were forced to use the veteran in Brown. I get it. I get the concern behind, the offensive line and the fact that, it hasn't really changed much from last year, and it should result in a similar trajectory for the offense. But I think, you made the point last episode, or maybe it was the episode before, Corey, where you talked about how, offensive lines can change overnight. And, I'm hoping that's the case here for Cam Akers. Akers was, a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. He was really one of the higher touted running backs going into college, ended up going to Florida State. He just happened to be playing behind arguably one of the worst offensive lines in college football last year. What I see on tape is he can pass protect, he can catch the ball, and I really like the talent, man. I see Dalvin Cook on tape when I watch Cam Akers play.
All right, Justin, so who's your number 3?
Yeah, so my number 3, I'm going to go with a wide receiver here, A.J. Green. He's currently ranked number 29 on the wide receiver rankings on Fantasy Pros ECR. I'm just not going to invest in a guy who's been perpetually hurt year over year, and they're foot injuries too. We talked about Deebo Samuel earlier on in the show. I just don't like foot injuries when you're talking about skill players. The other thing that's working against him is he's on the wrong side of 30 at this point. Burrow should be an improvement over Dalton. I've talked about that on previous shows, but there's a lot of mouths to feed here, and rookie quarterbacks typically don't sustain super relevant wideouts, especially in year one. I think between, A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, you've got the rookie T. Higgins coming in, you've got John Ross, who's a speedster still, Auden Tate, and then you've got Mixon and Gio in the backfield. There's a lot of good skill players here for the Bengals. I don't see the value here. I don't see the production coming for A.J. Green. This guy is done in my mind. I don't want any part of him. I'll actually take his teammate Tyler Boyd, Brandon Cooks, Hollywood Brown over A.J. Green right now.
Yeah, so honestly, I never expected A.J. Green to get so high, but here he is, right, in the top 30 wide receivers coming off of multiple injury-ridden seasons. I understand the appeal, right, because the last time we saw a healthy A.J. Green, he was Really, really fun to have. But when wide receivers lose it, I'm thinking Des Bryant. I'm thinking Andre Johnson, right? They lose it. Okay. And I agree with you, Justin. AJ has probably lost it.
So, Corey, who's your number 3?
So my number 3, I'm going quarterback here, and I'm going Josh Allen. Right now, he's going as quarterback 7, which implies you'll be starting him without question in one quarterback leagues. And I see him as a waiver wire guy by week 7. I don't like trusting guys simply for their legs, right? I feel like relying on a quarterback's arm is the safer way to play fantasy. There's a reason why guys like Cam and RG3 and Johnny Manziel and Mike Vick, although Vick had other stuff going on, don't last in fantasy, right? They had big arms, great legs, but they lack the consistency I look for through the year. Now, look, Josh Allen will have weeks, but in my mind, he'll become too volatile to start with any confidence, and he will be a waiver wire fixture once again by midseason.
Wow, Corey, I think that's pretty bold. I think I'm going to have to disagree with you here on Josh Allen being a complete bust. I think Allen will be a startable quarterback every week, and I think he'll have those games where he completely blows the lid off and he wins you your week. I think that's something that people forget. It's just the fact that he has the upside to put up 40 points at the quarterback position any week. I think his legs alone keep him outside of bust territory in my mind. And I talked about that a couple episodes ago, how running quarterbacks are not nearly as injury prone as quarterbacks in the pocket are. There's that misconception that running quarterbacks tend to get more injured, and that's just not the case. Now, I do agree with you on some fronts, though. People forget how good the Bills' defense is, which definitely should cap his consistent upside. He struggled with passing down the field. There's no denying that. He needs to take a step forward in that department. That's really the next step for Josh Allen is, can he throw the ball down the field? He's never had a wideout, though, like Stephon Diggs, who's coming into Buffalo this year. So I'm really curious to see how he does now. They've surrounded him with some pretty legit options on offense between John Brown, Cole Beasley, and then Stephon Diggs. I mean, he's got a pretty good trio of wide receivers there. And yes, John Brown is solid. He was wide receiver 20 last year with Josh Allen, but he's not Stephon Diggs. I agree with you. He's going to have a lot of big weeks, but he's also going to throw a couple stinkers in there. I've got Allen at 14 in my quarterback rankings, so I probably won't own much of Josh at his current market price. But I get it. I'm not ready to call him a bust, though, quite yet.
All right, then, Justin, who's your number 2?
So I'm going to go with another rookie running back as my number 2 bust, and I'm going to go with DeAndre Swift, running back from the Detroit Lions. Now, listen, I know most analysts had Swift as their number 1 running back coming into the NFL draft this year. I went back and watched his tape, and I just didn't see it. He didn't have the traits that I was looking for when you're looking at an all-pro skill player. He ran behind one of the best offensive lines in college football last year. I see a lot of Sonny Michel in his tape, which isn't necessarily a compliment, as we know, being Patriots fans. In full disclosure, I am a carry-on truther. I have been since he came out of Auburn. And I don't blame the Lions for taking Swift where they did, right? Running back has been a weakness for the Lions for what feels like decades now, ever since Barry Sanders was in the fold. And they struggled with depth last year. I mean, hell, they were rolling out Ty Johnson. Remember the waiver wire god Ty Johnson? Last year when Kerryon went down. I just like the talent of Kerryon more than Swift, and that's why Swift is on my bust list. I see Swift playing that sort of Theo Riddick-esque role that the Lions missed last year, where he's going to get maybe 5 to 7 carries a game and maybe 2 to 3 catches. I think he's definitely a premium handcuff with the injury history of Johnson, but I'm taking Kerryon over Swift all day this year.
So Justin, though, Swift, though, is currently being valued kind of as I'll give this to you, a higher end running back 3. You feel he won't return that value?
I think he's going to be a guy where you're going to throw him out there and he might have a week where he gives you 15 or 20 and then he gives you a bunch of weeks where he only gives you 3 or 4. I just don't think the consistency is going to be there to warrant investing an RB3 pick in him. I'd rather have a high upside guy like Darius Geis in that range.
Yeah, so I get it, right? I don't necessarily agree, but I get your logic. I get where you're coming from. Like I said, Swift is being drafted as an RB3. That's what he's being valued as right now. The only competition is being Kerryon, and that leads me to believe that an RB3 value is a realistic possibility.
So, Corey, who's your number 2?
My number 2 bust, I am going with a wide receiver who has busted in the past, and I'm going with Devante Parker. Look, I think the fun time to own him has come and gone, right? It came and went in my mind, and he's currently being drafted as a wide receiver 2, and I see him as a painful to own wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4. My thought here is, and this is the bold take here, you're not going to be starting Devante Parker after week 3. He will have one good week in those first 3 weeks. He's going to have 2 bad weeks, and then we'll be seeing another main receiving threat emerge, whether it's Gesicki or Williams. Look, I think he'll flash again towards the end of the year, right? But that's going to be that, right? So I think he's going to have his flashes, but at that point, he's going to have lost any trust or value that he would have had. You'll invest a top 50 pick in him, and you'll look back at your draft board regretting you ever did.
Wow, that's bold, Corey. Yeah, I mean, and I don't necessarily disagree either. I definitely owned Parker last year when he was hot to own, and it was definitely terrific, especially after many years of expecting to break out. It finally came in that 5th year, right? I mean, what guys can say they've essentially been a fantasy wasteland the first 4 years of their career, and then they break out year 5. I mean, this guy Parker won a lot of dudes' fantasy championships last year, including myself. There's a couple things that I think are working against Devante Parker that you kind of referenced earlier. I think one of the key things is the fact that he's playing in the AFC East. AFC East has some pretty stellar defenses right now. You look at the Patriots and the Bills as an example. He's going to have to go against those teams 4 times this season. I don't like that. The other factor is you've got Tua coming into the fold here. Yes, you have Fitzpatrick throwing the ball probably at the beginning part of the season, but when does Tua come in? And yes, Tua was a great college quarterback at Bama, but we don't really know what to expect in the NFL until we see it, right? Does he favor Preston Williams? Does he favor Mike Gesicki? Does he favor Matt Breida over Devante Parker? The uncertainty makes me nervous. I get it. When I'm looking at a top 20 rideout, I'd rather have guys like Tyler Lockett, Robert Woods, or even Stephon Diggs over Devante Parker these days.
Same here. I'm in complete agreement. All right, so Justin, we have made it. We have reached it. We are at the number 1 spot for each of us. Get us started, Justin. Who is your number 1 complete bust for 2020?
So I'm going to pick a guy that I think's been getting a lot of hype over the last number of weeks here, and that's Raheem Mostert, San Francisco 49ers running back.
Yep.
Now, recency bias, I think, comes into play a lot with Raheem Mostert, especially when you look back at the playoff games that he played. I mean, he had that historic playoff game, and I think people just continue to have that in the forefront of their mind. And the end of the season, he was solid. I think he was RB7 through the latter part of last year. I just think one of the things we have to remember and we have to keep in the forefront of our minds is the fact that Kyle Shanahan, yes, his offenses do typically prove to be very valuable for running backs, but he likes to employ a variety of running backs, right? He kind of has like that Rolodex of running backs that he can go to. He's always typically employed, an RBBC. Yes, Breed is off the roster, but we do have finally, after many years, a healthy Jerick McKinnon who should be back and finally healthy. We see guys all the time, right, who break out and then just disappear from fantasy relevance. I'm thinking of guys like, CJ Spiller, CJ Anderson. You look at like Robert Foster, who was a hyped wide receiver coming into last year, who just completely fell off the face of the earth. I think we'll see games where Mostert will show up without a doubt. I think he'll have those games where he puts up respectable, he's a respectable output there. But I think we'll see a game where Tevin Coleman shows up. I think we'll have a game where Jerick McKinnon shows up. I just see a messy timeshare here, and Mostert could potentially be nearly unstartable a few weeks in by the season. At his current value, I'd rather own guys like Devin Singletary or Darius Geis over Raheem Mostert at this time.
What I like about this, Justin, is you make the point that it's going to be a messy timeshare, and messy timeshares only work in fantasy when the running game is phenomenal. And for the 49ers last year, it was phenomenal. But we've talked about and preached about how there's so many moving pieces in a fantasy season and in just the NFL season that how can we be confident that the 49ers running game is going to be just as potent as it was last year, right? So I like the idea of owning Mostert before he became a top 25 running back. Top 25. Okay, that's risky for a guy you might be counting on as your RB2. And I think he's more talented than Tevin Coleman, I really do. But this job shows no signs of being anything more than, like you said, a messy committee. So I'm with you, right? All season, you won't know if it's a Coleman game, a Mostert game, a McKinnon game, or even a Jeff Wilson game, right? I think this is a good call. I don't see him as being trustable, let alone an RB2.
So, Corey, we've reached the end of your list. Who's your number one?
Justin, I don't think you're ready for this. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
So, look, this is a bold take, and I know it is, but I've actually been saying this ever since kind of the end of last season. And my number one complete bust is Mark Andrews.
Wow.
Yeah. Tight end, currently going as like the tight end 4, tight end 5, tight end 3 in some areas. Look, I don't think it's as severe of a case as what I mentioned in my number 5 bust, but I do feel like this is going to be a similar situation of Austin Hooper. Now, when people watch Mark Andrews' tape, everyone sees something different. What I saw was a big-bodied guy who can jump and get it if need be. I didn't see someone who could sprint like, Kittle or Kelsey. I didn't see someone who could be that super freak tight end athlete who commands I must draft this guy and I must be starting this guy, right? There's not enough there to make me spend this kind of capital on this kind of guy. With this bust rank, I am saying, and here's my bold take, right? You are drafting him, expecting him to be a set it and forget it tight end. But I'm expecting that he will be, in a good amount of leagues, a waiver wire tight end by week 8. It'll be an inconsistent mess. He'll be a spot performer at best. Gary Barnidge will be holding out his arms and welcoming Mark Andrews into the one-and-done tight end land. What do you think, Justin?
Wow. Bold, very bold take. And shout out to Gary Barnidge at the same time, right? I think I'm going to obviously have to disagree here with you just because Andrews is going to be the one worst case scenario number 2 option on the Ravens offense this year. With no Hayden Hurst in the fold, I could see a very similar season for Andrews. He's really Lamar's main red zone weapon. When you talk about touchdowns, I think Andrews is going to be a really solid tight end. Now, this guy, Andrews, is number 4 in yards per target from tight ends since they started tracking targets back in 1992. He's even ahead of your boy George Kittle. I thought that was an interesting stat. It just shows how involved he is in his offense and his big playability at the tight end position. Now, I acknowledge that I've mentioned I do expect passing TD regression from Lamar this season. But at a shallow position, man, I still like Andrews a ton. That's a bold take to say Andrews is going to be a complete bust. I like it, though. It's bold.
I'm nothing if not risky, right?
I like the call, man. It's bold. Plant your flag and go with it.
Yep. All right. Well, next week it is going to be time for the car ride to Maine. Justin and I will go through a segment we are both really excited about. It's a little game we ended up creating to take up some time during a couple long car trips. Are you curious? Well, tune in next week to find out what it's all about. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell, download, follow, like, comment, whatever you have to do to show some support. I'm Corey.
And I'm Justin.
And this has been the 4th and Long Fantasy Football Show. See you next time.
Royalty-free music courtesy of Ben Sound. The views and opinions expressed on today's episode are that of the 4th and Long Fantasy Football Show. Remember to like and subscribe.